A tall, muscular, illiterate, lesser mountain man, says one report. A California trail guide and part-time warrior who scurried in and out of the pages of Western American history for 87 years. Today we will be talking about a little-known character of the West, a man who ran from trouble back east and made a name for himself as a pioneer, fur trapper, guide, and even helped in the rescue of the Donner Party at age 84. Well, let's get into it, shall we? My name is Steven, and this is Wild West Deep Dives. Caleb Greenwood was born in 1763, most likely in the state of Virginia, though some speculate he may have hailed from Tennessee. Regardless of his precise birthplace, one thing is clear. Greenwood's youth was marked by a tragic and violent event that would set the course of his future. At the age of 18, Greenwood found himself embroiled in a deadly confrontation with a lawman, the details of which have been subject of much speculation over the centuries. According to Mark McLaughlin's article, who is an excellent source for this episode, I got the majority of information from it, and it will be linked in the show notes if you would like to check it out. But the Greenwood family were slave owners who had fallen into debt. And when a lawman arrived to collect on this debt, a dispute erupted. The female members of the household boldly protested the lawman's presence, and in the ensuing chaos, the young Caleb Greenwood grabbed a rifle and fatally shot the lawman. Fearing the consequences of his actions, Greenwood's father then ordered his son to flee westward, beyond the Mississippi River, and into the uncharted territories of Indian country. This formative incident, teemed with the shadows of violence and lawlessness, would come to define Greenwood's later years as he sought to escape his past and forge a new life for himself in the rugged American frontier. The circumstances surrounding his early life may be murky, but the dramatic events that propelled him towards the West would leave a lasting mark on the man he would become. The first known facts about the life of Caleb Greenwood emerged from the accounts of Wilson Price Hunt, who encountered the seasoned frontiersman in December 1810 as part of the Astoria expedition. This overland party was making its way from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean. It's unclear whether Greenwood was part of the expedition or if he was just tagging along for part of the journey. As they wintered at the mouth of the Nottoway River in northwest Missouri, Hunt had a chance to cross paths with Caleb Greenwood, though he first makes mention of him in late January 1811. At this time, Greenwood departed from these men, most likely just using them as a way to get upriver to the Mandan safely. What he did for this time is again lost to history, as the historical record falls frustratingly silent on the details of his life before this expedition. However, he shows up again in 1812 as a member of Manuel Lisa's expedition. Other members of this expedition include Antoine Lados and his brother Abraham, Reuben Lewis, Edward Rose, who we have discussed on this podcast, and 8 other seasoned frontiersmen. They left in the spring and went upriver for trading and trapping, and got back to Fort Manuel near today's Council Bluffs in March 1813. The fort, built the previous year, would have a brief but impactful existence. On March 5, 1813, the outpost was attacked by Native American forces, who ultimately destroyed the fort. It is unclear whether Greenwood was present during the pivotal event, but the fate of Fort Manuel holds historical significance for other reasons as well. Most notably, it was at this location that Sacagawea, the legendary woman who accompanied the Lewis and Clark expedition, passed away on the 20th of December, 1812, according to the South Dakota State Historical Society. This next bit will be bouncing through time rather quickly, as there is little known facts of his movements and whereabouts. The next time Greenwood appears on historical record is as a member of the Chinook-Mum expedition to Santa Fe in 1815. He did not make the entire journey, as he stopped in Huerfano before rejoining the return journey to St. Louis in 1816. Greenwood disappears again until 1821, when the Indian agent, Benjamin O'Fallon, blacklisted him for illegally going up the Missouri with 5 other fur trappers. The next time Greenwood appears, he is listed as a trapper for William Henry Ashley, as he credits Greenwood with 200 pounds of beaver at $3 per pound in his account books. That totaled $606, which is about $19,700 today. Not a bad little haul. Historians believe that he was working under Captain Weber, or is it Weber, or Weber? I think it's Weber, because I think of Weber State University, but I could also be wrong on that. Regardless, Greenwood worked for his company of fur trappers, which by 1824 were funded by William Ashley, who had just created North America's first rendezvous for fur trappers. In short, these rendezvous were essentially a meeting spot for these mountaineer trappers, to meet every summer, where they could sell their pelts they collected all year and replenish their supplies for the upcoming year, and involve themselves in a little indulging of a few strong drinks and some good times. You'll see in some sources that say by early 1825, Greenwood was possibly back east at Fort Atkinson for a time, but I do not think that is the case, because you'll see in several other sources that one of William Ashley's caravans that left Chanel's Landing in Kansas City traveled up the Platte in 1825. Quote, Ashley's party descended the Green River and met Eton Provost at his encampment in the Uintah Basin. At Salt Lake, they met Hudson's Bay Company members with P.S. Ogden. This huge part of Americans and Canadians also included Sublette and Moses Harris, who had been trapping in the Rockies, as well as Jim Beckworth and Caleb Greenwood. So I do believe he was one of the many men that made a living in the mountains full time. In 1827, it seems Greenwood spent some time with the Crow. Greenwood would marry Bachika Yonadol, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name. She was half French and half Crow. They would marry, and according to BigSkyWords.com, she, quote, bore him a number of children. Jim Beckworth confirmed that Greenwood was with the Crow at the time, but with anything Jim Beckworth states, it needs to be taken with many grains of salt. As a common trend with Greenwood's life, from his marriage in 1827 until about 1843, we know very little of what he was doing. We can assume he was living with the Crow, and maybe the Mandan, just living his best life, but we don't know that for sure. It's rumored that him and his wife welcomed a baby boy into the world in 1838, but the birth year isn't precise. In 1843, Greenwood would take his family to St. Louis, where his wife, Bachika, would die during childbirth. In 1844, Greenwood guided a team of 27 wagons that was headed for Oregon. On their journey, they passed through Fort Hall using a trail that would become known as the Greenwood Cutoff. This cutoff would later be changed and become Sublette Cutoff. Quick note, Greenwood Cutoff is in western Wyoming and was at the parting of the ways and took the immigrants into northern Utah and eventually into southeast Idaho. Fort Hall is in modern-day Idaho, just southwest of Idaho Falls. In the summer of 1844, Elijah Stevens met Caleb Greenwood on the trail, and he hired him to guide a small wagon train over the Rocky Mountains to Fort Hall. These were also the first wagons over the Donner Pass. Fort Hall was a primitive trading post on the Snake River, and though Greenwood was 81 years old at the time, he boasted nearly 30 years of experience in the West. Man, the things he must have seen. 2 of Greenwood's sons would accompany him on this journey, Britton, who was 18, and John, who was 20. This is when we get an idea of just who Greenwood was and just how many kids Greenwood and his wife Bachika had. Mr. McLaughlin states, quote, over the years, Greenwood had gone Indian, from long residence with the Crow tribe in Yellowstone country, where his half-Crow, half-French wife Bachika birthed 7 children. A pioneer would go on to describe Old Greenwood as people began calling him. Quote, Greenwood was a very picturesque old man. He was dressed in buckskins and had a long heavy beard and used very picturesque language. On the 17th of August 1844, the Stevens-Townsend Murphy party, guided by Greenwood, left Fort Hall. They were following the trail of a similar pack train that had traveled it the year before. The Chiles party was led by the frontier explorer Joseph Walker and had successfully traveled it, but no one had yet made it to the Pacific coast. Captain Stevens' party of 50 men, women, and children, along with Greenwood and his 2 sons, had very little information to go off of in terms of what to expect. But with Greenwood's experience and knowledge, they were determined to push on. One of the men traveling with the party was named Isaac Hitchcock. He informed Greenwood that he had been a part of the 1833 Walker expedition and knew of a shortcut over the barren high desert that would take them to the Humboldt River. William Sublette was also traveling with the party and said similar things about the shortcut, as he had traveled it the year prior. It would later be named the Greenwood-Sublette Cutoff. It cut off 85 miles and 7 days of hard traveling from the original trail. Upon reaching the Humboldt River in early October, the party encountered an old northern Paiute Indian. Greenwood communicated with him via sign and drawing diagrams into the sand. Greenwood nicknamed him Truckee because of his frequent use of the word. Truckee's granddaughter later said that Truckee translates to "alright" or "very well." Chief Truckee had told Greenwood that 50 or 60 miles to the west, a river flowed east out of the mountains and had good grass for grazing and large trees. The party then took him as a guide. And turns out, Truckee was correct. After they crossed a nearly 40-mile wide desert, they reached the present-day area of Truckee Meadows, in what we now call Reno, Nevada. To show their appreciation of the old chief, they named the river the Truckee River. The route was a perfect passage to the west, though it was challenging. On one single day, they had to cross the river 10 times in order to get the men and animals across the river. But by mid-November, the Stevens party approached the junction of a creek in the Truckee River. It lies about 1 mile west of the present-day town of Truckee. Unsure which route to take, follow the Truckee River or follow the creek, they decided to split up. 6 headed south on horseback along the Truckee River, and 1 man, 2 boys, and 3 women followed the creek. Now free of the slow wagons, they were able to travel light and made it quickly to what was known as the first civilized place along the California Trail, Sutter's Fort in modern-day Sacramento. The group alerted John Sutter that a wagon train was on their way. The party had 11 wagons that pushed west. When they made their way to the junction, they had to reconsider their travel plans. The massive wall of granite began closing off the basin, and they soon realized it was impossible for them to get all their gear over it in just one trip. On the 25th of November, 1844, they packed up as much as they could into 5 wagons, and became the first wagon train to open the California Trail. Though Caleb Greenwood doesn't seem to be there physically, his experience and knowledge he shared with his sons and other party members was present. Shortly after arriving at Sutter's Fort, Caleb and his sons joined John Sutter's military effort in the Micheltorena War. The Micheltorena War was not one that many people remember. It was more of a staging for the real Battle of California. But according to the LA Times, quote, "The Battle of Cahuenga in Los Angeles in 1845 doesn't rank among such battles as Waterloo, Gettysburg, and Midway. But it was a real battle, re-aging a war that ultimately brought California to the United States." After this quick war, in which Sutter's volunteer army suffered a defeat, the Greenwoods would explore the Napa Valley. But just 6 months after arriving at Sutter's Fort, they led a small group of about 12 people back to Fort Hall. This is when Caleb Greenwood decided to blaze a new trail. Instead of taking the hard terrain in the Truckee Canyon, he made the decision to follow a ravine that lay northwest of the river to Alder Creek, then to Russell Valley, ultimately leading through Dog Valley. It lay a little ways north of the Truckee Canyon. In August of 1845, the Greenwoods set up camp on the intersection of the California and Oregon trails. Their plan was to promote the new trail that they had just helped quote-unquote discover. I have a feeling that some of the Native American tribes discovered these trails just a little bit before these fur trappers did. But it was the new harsh reality for these old fur trappers like Caleb Greenwood. The fur trade had played out, and their new sources of income relied on leading these Easterners out west. Greenwood's pitch to these immigrants was that the trail to California was easier and shorter. There weren't any hostile Native Americans, the climate was far better than Oregon, and that John Sutter was offering work and land. Soon enough, Greenwood was hired on as a guide for the train that consisted of several hundred people and 50 wagons. Charging $2.50 a wagon, he made a good wage. $125 in 1845 is about $5,100 today. Caleb Greenwood and his sons led the 50 wagons through the New Dog Valley Trail and made it to Sutter's Fort without having to abandon any of their wagons. This would be the first trip of its kind and lead to a new rush of immigrants to California. One of the families that were part of the wagon train, the William Ide family from Springfield, Illinois, wrote a letter back to residents of Springfield, telling of the easy trail to California, and some of the families to read it were the families of George Donner and James Reed, who decided to make their trip west in 1846. In April of 1846, Caleb Greenwood met the famous frontiersman James Clyman and another man, more sketchy character that promoted California, Lansford W. Hastings. Lansford Hastings promoted his own cutoff as the best route to California. In his book, Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California, that was published in 1845. The issue with this cutoff is not many people had actually traveled his route. The group met at Johnson's Ranch on the Bear River, and they decided to travel back to Fort Hall with Clyman, Hastings, and a small party of people with 150 horses and mules. Greenwood led the party over what is now known as Donner Pass, but because of the early season, they encountered deep snow and swollen streams. Greenwood and Clyman led the party across Nevada, toward Hastings' new cutoff in which they had little to no idea what to expect. Hastings' cutoff was a direct route to the Humboldt River from Fort Bridger, a 100-mile stretch of waterless desert. In essence, Hastings basically took a map, drew a line on it, and said this was my cutoff. He even promised people coming west that he would personally lead anyone who wanted to take his trail. Greenwood and the rest of the party were going to be traveling Hastings' cutoff for the first time. It turned out that the trail was barely suitable for mules, but for families with wagons, oxen, and children, it would have been impossible. Therefore, Old Greenwood laughed at Hastings' route and stayed on the established Humboldt Trail back to Fort Hall and safely delivered the party. He then arranged for the rest of his children to join him and took them and another small party back to California. After getting the party safely to the Humboldt River, he then departed with his family over the Donner Pass before winter set in. Now, I'm not going to go into every detail of the Donner Reed party. I plan on doing a full series on them in the future, but I will talk about how Old Greenwood helped in the rescue of them. Greenwood heard of the Donner Party 2 weeks after the snowshoe party made it out of the mountains, begging for help in February of 1847. Greenwood made his way through the flooded countryside to around modern-day San Francisco, where he met James Reed, the head of the Reed family of the Donner Reed Party. He had been exiled from the wagon train a while back, and made it over the mountains in time, unlike his family's wagon train. I will say that the entire time he was exiled, he was doing all he could to get his family over safely. You'll learn every detail in the series, I promise, but he was organizing the rescue party and Greenwood joined on. On the 23rd of February, Reed, Greenwood, and others left Johnson's Ranch, leading horses and precious food. In the mountains, the pack animals were bogged down in deep snow, and it forced the rescuers to continue via snowshoe. Old Greenwood was forced to stay at this forward camp. Though he was not happy about it, his son Britton would push forward with the snowshoe group. Of the 87 members of the Donner and Reed party, 48 members survived. In 1849, Caleb Greenwood may have participated in the California Gold Rush for a bit, but by 1850, Caleb Greenwood died at the age of 87. According to the UC Press, he died, quote, somewhere between Bear and Yuba rivers, in the open and threatening to shoot anyone who tried to move him indoors. Caleb Greenwood lived a legendary life, fur trapped with many of the men we idolize in movies, books, podcasts, stories, etc. He trailblazed routes that thousands and thousands of immigrants traveled over to chase their dreams in the West. Until the end of his days, he was known as a drinker, an active hunter, and a man of the mountains. Thank you everyone for listening. We will see you all next week. When in doubt, shoot straight, shoot fast. God bless.